Hello, everybody, and welcome to this very special episode of History Inside a Nutshell. And also, we are doing a audio version of the recording, so you guys have got both options there. So if you are listening to the audio recording, welcome to the Ships Nerds Anonymous podcast. But if you are on YouTube, then welcome to History Inside a Nutshell. So today, we are in for a really special treat because we are going to be reacting and narrating to the brand new Empress of Ireland sinking video. And of course, I am not going to go do this alone because we have not one, not two, but three special guests with us. But of course, we've got to begin with the one and only, and the animator for this amazing animation is Mr. Liam Sharp. Hello, Liam. Welcome.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, so much for having me on. I'm truly excited for this. Thank you so much.
And also, we've got Jamie from Old Shipping Lanes with us. Hello, Jamie.
Hello, everybody. Thank you all so much for letting me be a part of this video. Like Liam said, I'm truly excited to react with this, to this with you all.
And then, of course, we got our one and only Mr. DK.
Hello, all. And, of course, you can actually hear me very clearly because I do have a new microphone. I'm willing to try it out and also excited for this animation as well. And thank you guys for watching. And also, if you're on the audio format, thank you for listening as well. We'll be in for a good ride.
Oh, yes, we are definitely going on for a very good ride. Now, even though Liam has done the animation, I've never seen this before, but Jamie and DK have, and it has got tremendous applause and reaction. So I am excited to watch this, but I'm also really excited and intrigued to know about the sinking, because the Empress of Ireland, to me, I don't really know it very well. So I'm actually looking forward to watching the footage, and as well as hearing more of the story about it. Now, I should point out that if you are watching or listening to it, there is a disclaimer, and the disclaimer is that this will contain some depictions of violence and mild cursing and loud noises, because I know there are some people who have sensory overload to noises. But then there's also going to be descriptions of disturbing information, and if you are on YouTube, there is going to be some flashing lights, so viewer discretion is advised on YouTube. And for audio, listeners have been informed. So we'll probably get the disclaimer out of the way first. But before we begin, Liam, I probably want to understand the history about the animation, because before we started recording, you said that it took about 8 months to make, but this is your second time of doing the sinking animation from the Empress of Ireland. Could you tell me more about that?
Yes, absolutely. So this animation has quite the history behind it. So I started this particular animation in April of 2024. And it was actually before that I was working on a Lusitania animation. But after about a couple months, maybe 3-4 months of working on that, I decided to shift my focus to the Empress of Ireland, as I decided that, the Empress of Ireland has never really been told in full in regards to the sinking. Its story has never been accurately told in such a detailed manner. So I decided to embark on a big research project. And I thought that this would only take, maybe 3, 4, maybe even 5 months, but it ended up taking 8 entire months to work on. So the first thing I did was I went through all these documents, such as court documents, testimonial documents, so many books, various books, first-hand testimonial, rare audio interviews, etc. And I compiled all of that into one big document where I pretty much outlined the entire sinking of the Empress minute by minute. And I took that document and I applied it to the Empress of Ireland model that I had in Blender. And with the use of that particular document over the course of 8 months, I pretty much crafted an animation based entirely off of that timeline. And the results, I think, are pretty terrifying. It paints a very gruesome picture as to how the Empress of Ireland sank. I usually like to say to people that this animation pretty much paints the harsh reality of what it really pretty much was like on the Empress of Ireland when she went down. This animation focuses on the human aspect of it, and really just the results are absolutely terrifying, as you will see in a few moments.
But I can imagine that as well, really. It would be terrifying because on the channel, History Inside a Nutshell, we did do a video cover of the SS store stand, and that was the ship that was responsible for the sinking of the Empress of Ireland. But I'll let you guys get into more detail on that, even though we have done a video on that. But I know that I did read a testimony a long time ago from the captain of the store stand. And that testimony was really interesting because the inquiries, from what I understand, they were led by Lord Mersey, who was the same person who led the Titanic and the Lusitania inquiries. But and back me up if I'm wrong, or probably if I'm wrong, just tell me. But with that in mind, I thought it was really interesting to see that in a different perspective. But with all the research you've done, Liam, it just sounds like it's piecing all the missing puzzles together.
Yes, it absolutely is that. And that's the interesting thing as well about Captain Anderson. So obviously, Captain Kendall of the Empress and Captain Anderson of the Storstad, they both had very, very different stories as to how the collision unfolded. And this is something that will actually be explained in this animation. There's going to be subtitles on the bottom left corner that will explain it. I'll also be commentating over it and, providing more information about that. But it's kind of mysterious, really, in that regard. I don't think we'll ever truly know exactly what happened in the events leading up to the collision because there's just so much conflicting information. All we can do is sort of piece together a vague idea of what could have happened. No matter where you go, no matter what you read, there's always going to be sort of a different take on how the collision happened. And this is sort of, this kind of falls in that ballpark a little bit, I like to imagine. This animation, it's kind of its own idea of how the collision might have happened. But with the sinking itself, I completely agree. It's really just putting the puzzle pieces together to form an entire picture. And that's really what this animation was all about.
I think with that being said, really, we'll probably make a start with that. So, I'm definitely really nervous about this, but I'm really excited to see what you've done, Liam. And of course, as well, DK, even though we can't see you in the video footage, you got your Empress of Ireland model. And Jamie, I know that the Empress of Ireland is kind of like your favourite ship, like more than the Titanic or something. So I think we've definitely got a good team here. So I think without further ado, we will begin the animation, and I'm going to leave it all down to the boys because I know that they know better than I do. So I'll probably be in the background unless that I'm really needed or describe it. But yeah, I hope you enjoy.
Here we go.
So this animation begins several hours after the Empress of Ireland went down. We can see the debris field here. The debris field was absolutely massive after the Empress went down. And it was described that there was a massive flotilla of ships in the area when the Empress sank, and that's what you just saw. Now, what you see with this scene here is really a frightening scene on itself. So when the Empress of Ireland sank, the riverbed was only about 150 feet below the surface of the actual river. And so, unfortunately, when the Empress of Ireland went down, it is extremely likely that there were air pockets when the ship sank. And here we see what remains of the Empress of Ireland on the riverbed 8 hours after she sank.
Jamie, you put your hand up for that. Can you tell us a bit more?
Well, it was actually a question because Liam said, of course, the ship is not too deep. Was it true that you can actually dive to the wreck if you have certification?
Yes, that is true. So some people have done this before, but if you get the proper certifications for it, you can actually dive to the wreck of the Empress of Ireland. Although a lot of experts in the field, they really advise against it just because of how dangerous it is. If you slip off the hull, you know, it's not going to be a good situation at all. So it's a very dangerous wreck to dive. There's a lot of fishing nets on it. You really have to be an expert diver to be able to dive the wreck of the Empress of Ireland.
That's the same way for the ancient HS mechanic as well.
So the way this animation works, pretty much, is what we've done is we traveled back in time, pretty much, to, you know, just 16 or so hours before what you just saw, the ship on the seabed. And it is from here on out that we are going to really just see the demise, the final hours of the Empress. So the Empress of Ireland, she is steaming from Quebec City to Liverpool, and she has a complement of nearly 1,500 people on board, and that includes nearly 200 members of the Salvation Army band. They are headed for a conference in England, and there are a lot of well-known people in first cabin aboard the Empress. You have the Irvings, for example, the Irving family. They are very famous actors and actresses, and they are also headed back home to England. So the ship is steaming down the St. Lawrence River. In this animation, she is only a couple hours out from Quebec City, only 2 or so hours out. And the St. Lawrence River is really just a massive, massive body of water. At its widest distance, I believe the river was something like 30, 40 miles wide. It's a massive body of water. And even though it's late May, that doesn't mean that the water is going to be there. So what has been happening with the St. Lawrence River is as all the snow melts from the warmer sun, all of that winter runoff goes straight into the St. Lawrence River. So even though the air temperature might be a little bit warmer, the water temperature really is not too dissimilar to what the water temperatures were on the Titanic. The water temperature in the St. Lawrence River would only be 36 degrees Fahrenheit.
Jamie, you had your hand up again.
Yes, because as we watch the lovely Empress sailing by, Liam, perhaps you could help me if I'm saying anything wrong. But unlike the Titanic, right, when it comes to safety, I seem to recall that there was a documentary saying that she actually earned the ship or the nickname of being unsinkable, right, because of her safety at the time.
Oh, the Empress of Ireland?
Yes, the Empress of Ireland, yes.
Yes, so that's actually a very interesting thing, because with the Titanic, of course, that was sort of not necessarily a myth, but it was sort of twisted as, you know, the years went on, as Titanic developed that legend status. When in, of course, actuality, they described the Titanic as being practically unsinkable in engineering newspapers. That's sort of a different thing with the Empress of Ireland. With the Empress of Ireland, there seem to be advertisements in newspapers that do indeed describe her as being unsinkable. And that's a very fascinating thing because of just how blatant it was. Now, this is a very interesting scene that I wanted to commentate on real quick. So the Allen liner Alsatia, she is pictured here on her maiden voyage to Canada. And this is very interesting because the Alsatian, she is a brand new liner built for the Allen line. And she is beautifully equipped, beautifully fitted. And the Empress of Ireland beforehand was actually the largest ship on the Canadian routes. And that is a title that she wasn't dethroned from until just now. And it just so happened that the Alsatian, on her maiden voyage from Liverpool to Quebec City, she passed by the Empress of Ireland. And it is on the final voyage of the Empress of Ireland that she is dethroned from that title of being the largest ship on the Canadian route.
DK, you have your hand up.
And I do. I actually want to refer to a little bit on Odyssey class, which is what flight loss of the RMS Titanic. That Liam, you did mention that the water is 36 degrees Fahrenheit. It's about to be sinking, right?
Sorry, DK, you were cutting out. Could you repeat that?
Oh, sorry. New mic, so this happens.
No worries at all.
Alright, so I'm actually looking at Odyssey class. And you did say the water temperature around that time was 36 degrees Fahrenheit, correct?
Approximately, yep.
So I looked at it. 36 degrees. Your exhaustion or unconsciousness will be about a quarter to a half hour. And your expected survival time will be about 30 to 90 minutes. And that's actually very doable. And this little line right here, a death of this nature is not a peaceful way to go.
No, not at all. And it's very unfortunate because in the case of Titanic, you can only really survive in those waters for maybe 15 minutes, maybe a little bit more. With the Empress of Ireland, I almost feel as though, even though the water was slightly warmer, that those in the water, it was just more brutal, I feel as. Just because of the fact you were kept alive for a little bit longer, and so that suffering was unfortunately prolonged. And so here we have the Empress of Ireland at 1:51 a.m. in the morning, May 29th, 1914. Shortly after the fog bank rolled in, Captain Kendall ordered the Empress of Ireland at a full stop. This would be a decision that would result in the loss of this ship, along with over 1,000 souls of. What Captain Kendall really should have been doing is keeping the ship going ahead, albeit at a reduced speed, of course. This is exactly what the Storstad is doing at this moment. She is going ahead, proceeding at a slower rate. However, the Empress of Ireland is at a stop.
I'd like to point out, my apologies for interrupting, but Jamie, you had your hand up, so I'll leave you to take the mic, take the floor.
I'm sorry, Liam. It's just the amazing details of this animation also. But if we're talking about Captain Kendall, this was a captain with quite some experience. And like you say, Liam, what he should have been doing is like moving slow ahead. I can personally understand the decision, of course, of not going or sailing into the fog, or moving ahead. I'm sorry, of course, of the fear of being hit or hit anything else, what at the end doomed the ship.
Yes, absolutely. And Captain Kendall, he was a very experienced sailor. He was extraordinarily experienced. Just years previously, he, of course, was the person who caught the infamous Crippen. And, you know, he was a very famous captain, very well regarded. And I too can understand why he would stop this ship, just out of the fear of this fog and the mystery ship, which seemingly wasn't changing its course previously. So I can understand why he'd do this. I can really put myself in his shoes and understand why, you know, the reasoning behind him doing it. But unfortunately, what he really should have been doing, as per maritime regulation, is proceeding forwards at a reduced rate. Captain Kendall, at this time, he was actually very nervous. He was observed by several sailors on the bridge at this time, actually pacing the bridge, walking back and forth and between the chart room and the wheelhouse, out of just sheer nervousness at this mystery ship, because they haven't heard anything from it. It's to my understanding that no wireless messages were even communicated with this mystery ship. And unfortunately, suddenly at approximately 1:53, 1:54, that's when the lights emerge from the fog. And it was that mystery ship that turned out to be the Storstad. And we can see her slowly bearing down upon the Empress of Ireland. Now the Storstad, she was moving at an incredibly slow speed. She was loaded completely to capacity. She was obviously a freighter, and the ship was completely loaded with cargo. And it's because of that, in addition to her reduced speed, she's only moving at 1.5 knots. But even though Captain Anderson of the Storstad, even though he's trying desperately to reverse the engines and do anything he can to stop the ship, the immense momentum behind the Storstad and all the cargo that she's carrying, nothing can stop it. She's going to continue drifting forward. And here we can see she's slowly bearing down upon the Empress of Ireland. Captain Kendall, he orders the Empress full ahead in a desperate attempt to escape the Storstad, but he's only able to make it up to 1.5 knots before the Storstad bears down upon the Empress of Ireland. And this is a very interesting thing as well, because perhaps if Captain Kendall did not order the ship full ahead, perhaps the Storstad may not have struck the Empress amidships, directly where the boilers were. Here we can see the Storstad ripping through the boilers.
Yes. Oh my god.
And so, what unfortunately happened was, in addition to the boiler rooms and machinery rooms, the Storstad surged through. She also cut through the dining saloons, sleeping quarters. It was really just the heart of the ship, the Storstad cut through it. This was the absolute worst possible spot the Storstad could have collided with.
Now, I'm trying to process this out here because that was really terrifying. Because I can't imagine what everyone must have seen if they survived at all. But I know that Jamie and DK, you both had your hands up. So, Jamie, I think you should go first. You have your hand up there.
Like Liam says, with the animation, the Storstad where she hits the ship, it's the most weak part actually of the entire ship. So call it coincidence, call it what you will, but that part of the ship where she hit was actually straight away the killing blow.
Yes, absolutely. And it's extraordinarily unlucky as well, given the fact that the Storstad, she didn't actually collide inside one compartment. She just so happened to collide in a spot where there was a split bulkhead. So, as a result of the collision, that split bulkhead was demolished, and those two boiler rooms were immediately flooded.
As well, if I might interject one more time, sorry DK for cutting the line. But I don't know if you guys can hear the voice lines actually in the animation because of our giving commentary. One more reason to watch the animation in your own time. But what the Storstad should have been doing is keeping the bow of the ship inside of the Empress to minimize the damage, or at least the flooding. Instead, of course, like you could probably see in the bottom, is that she actually moved away because of the current and letting the gaping wound of the Empress open.
Yes, exactly that. And really, it was that river current that pretty much doomed the Empress. Had the Storstad remained lodged into the Empress of Ireland, that would have basically plugged up that massive gaping gash from the Empress and bought her possibly hours of time when she succumbed. But unfortunately, that strong current of the St. Lawrence from all of that winter runoff in the river pulled the two ships apart, and now the Empress is rapidly taking on water. And what you just heard about a minute ago was a steam siren from on board the Empress. that steam siren was activated, and it was actually that woke up most of the passengers aboard the Empress of Ireland rather than the collision. The collision was so slight that barely any of the passengers woke up from it. It was sort of like a hot knife cutting into butter. It was so swift, so sharp, and so swift that it woke me. It was that shrill sound of the steam siren that infected. And that steam siren not only woke up the passengers, but it also ordered the crew to close the watertight doors and set up the lifeboats, as we can see here with the crew just pushing the boats out.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, there's actually one crew member that I do like to point out that actually does have a connection with the RMS Titanic. That would be William Parr, who happened to be a fireman who was on board the RMS Titanic. She's sinking, and now here we are on the Empress of Ireland 2 years later. Empress of Ireland. You can imagine the luck he had surviving 2 different shipwrecks, 2 different situations.
Absolutely. And I actually kind of go into this a little bit with this animation. I put a quote on here from William Parr. He described the Titanic as going down very slowly, and he actually describes in his testimonial saying that waiting around for the Titanic was the hard part. The Empress of Ireland, however, she rolled over like a hog in a ditch. That's exactly what William Parr said. As the water floods into the Empress, it really just submerges all of the machinery rooms and boiler rooms. The steam begins to drain out, especially as steam is being vented from the funnels. Here you can see the engine, which is just aft the boiler room. The water has filled the boiler room to the point where it is surging over the bulkheads and into the engine room. Almost none of the watertight doors were able to be closed in the moments after the collision. However, one of the watertight doors that did manage to get closed was inside the engine. It managed to close the watertight door into the engine as water flowed through it. But it was only minutes later that the water had flooded the boiler room to the point where it was starting to flood over the massive compartments into the engine room. And that's when they had to abandon it. As a matter of fact, something that I only discovered after creating this animation was some of the engine room workers, they tried to fill water tanks on the port side of the ship in a desperate effort to counteract the list of the ship, but that's when the water began flowing over the compartment and they had to abandon the coast. So something you just saw here as well were the port side lifeboats. A lot of the crew members, their posts were on the port side lifeboats because these crew members, they were assigned certain posts to go to in the event of emergency. So a lot of these crew members, they were going to the port side and trying to push these boats uphill, but you can imagine how difficult it is. These lifeboats each weighed 5 tons, and they were of steel construction. And as this list rapidly grows more and more, these crew members really just struggle to push them uphill. And Chief Officer Steve, after giving orders to the wireless shaft to send out an SOS, he went after these portside boats and word by word said, "It's no use on these side boys. Get to the starboard side boats quickly." And all of the men rushed over to the starboard boats in an effort to launch them. But unfortunately, as more and more men continued to come up onto deck from the crew quarters, they obviously didn't hear this warning and this order. So a lot of them continued to, go over to the port side and push these boats uphill and really struggle with it.
One thing I also like what you did with the animation is that you capture the element of the human emotion so well when it comes to the sinking, because these were minutes of pure terror. People being woken up from their deep sleep, and all of a sudden their ship that they thought it was so safe, and they were sleeping comfortably in their bunks, all of a sudden just goes to the side. It must have been terrifying.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So here, as I previously described, is one of those portside boats. that crew members continued to attempt launching. Lifeboat 2 on the port side was loaded with nearly a full complement, and it began to lower shortly after the power initially went out. But unfortunately, because of that list, the keel of Boat 2 dragged against the superstructure, snapped from its falls, and rolled down the hull into the river. And here is the third-class dining saloon, which we just saw only a few minutes ago, getting demolished by the Storstad, now underwater, flooding. And unfortunately, a lot of these passengers, they woke up far too late. And unfortunately, so many of these passengers were drowned simply within their bunks without even having the chance to leave their cabins. That's how fast the ship was sinking. Water is flowing through portholes, and, you know, as the ship sinks further and further, she's going to be sinking quicker and quicker as well. As a matter of fact, you'll notice that even though it's only been really just a couple of minutes since the impact, 2 entire decks within the hull have already dropped on. Now, below decks, inside the third class, it really is just a struggle, a desperate fight to escape this sinking ship. Now, you gotta keep in mind, this was the first night out that the ship is sinking on. This is the first night out. These passengers did not have the opportunity to fully explore the ship, really get their bearings. So a lot of these passengers just, you can imagine the confusion of trying to find their way up. And a lot of the people in the steerage, in the third cabin, it's just a maze of corridors they are trying to get through. And as you can see here, this is Lifeboat 1. I haven't found the particular reason as to why they did this. I have a suspicion, as per other lifeboats on this ship, that it may have been stuck to its falls. But with Lifeboat 1, they actually loaded the boat before swinging it out. And suddenly, those lines snapped. And the boat rolled up against its davits and dumped a dozen passengers out into the water. And one of the stewards who stood by and watched this happen, he took a life preserver and threw it into the water for these passengers who fell out of the lifeboat. And these life preservers, they had chemicals and a flare attached to them so that when they detached from the railings, this flare would illuminate and give off a very eerie balloon glow. And here's another lifeboat that just broke from its lines. I believe Lifeboat 15. As it was being lowered on the stern, a lot of panicked passengers jumped onto this lifeboat, and the lifeboat broke from its falls and plunged into the sea.
And Liam, if I may ask you a question about this, because maybe even though I know much about the ship, you might have more information regarding this. But during the sinking of the Titanic, Captain Smith was very calm, as we know. How was Captain Kendall during the sinking?
Captain Kendall is a very interesting one. He seems to have been in a very calm state, but there's also times where it seems like he might have been in shock. Early into the sinking, he went around the boat deck assisting with pushing the boats out and getting them prepared. And then at about this stage of the sinking, you can actually see him on the bridge. He went up to the bridge wing with his megaphone, calling down onto the boat deck, filled with panicked passengers, pleading with them to be calm, and begging with them to remain cool and collected. And there was even one case where a passenger even recalled saying that Captain Kendall said that the ship would not sink and that everything would be all right. And this is very interesting because Chief Officer Speed was actually, he went on record of saying this as well. A lady from the first cabin, she struggled her way up the companionway. And she wandered into the wheelhouse, and Chief Officer Steed was there, and he told her that the ship is all right. She was not in danger. So really, it was kind of, it was very chaotic among the officers and crew during this time. see here, the boat deck is now pretty much flush with the river at this point. As the superstructure drops further and further under, you have water that's flowing through all of these windows, all of these doorways, all of these skylights, etc. And that's really just hastening the sinking of this ship. It's to the point now where the superstructure has dropped under so far that with the water pretty much level with the boat deck, a lot of these lifeboats are not even lowering it. They're simply detaching because the water is so close. There's not even a need to lower these lifeboats anymore. They're just simply detaching and floating away from the boat deck. And that's something that you can observe with these particular lifeboats here.
And what we need to remember as well is that the ship took so quick to sink, like 14 minutes. People couldn't have comprehended what they saw or understand, as we can clearly see how the ship all of a sudden completely shifts to one side.
Yes, absolutely. And this is the point where the Empress of Ireland loses her fight with gravity. Gravity takes over. The Empress of Ireland exceeds her maximum roll that she was intended for, which she already had exceeded many minutes beforehand, incredibly. The ship was only intended to list and roll approximately 35 degrees, but by the time the ship rolled, she was just over 45 degrees onto her starboard side. So it's really a testament to how sturdy and well-designed the Empress of Ireland was, to be able to exceed that maximum roll by so many degrees. But unfortunately, with the rate the ship was sinking at, she could only exceed it by so many degrees, and as you can see here, the ship just suddenly keeled over. And when she rolled onto her side, it was not slowly, it was very swift and very violent. So many people were taken off guard by this sudden capsize. Chief Officer Stee and a group of passengers, they were observed by the forward funnel, and they were observed taking their clothes off, taking their shoes off, in preparation for the final plunge of the ship. Very few people, however, expected that the final plunge of the ship would involve it capsizing.
DK.
Alright, this question just recently came up on a Historic Travels Q&A live stream, and I thought I want to ask you this question. Who was one of the bridge officers that got sucked up in the funnel? Because I had no idea. That was actually the first time I had heard that before.
Yeah, so that's one of the very violent things about the Empress of Ireland. So, just to clarify real quick, when the Empress of Ireland turned onto her side, all of this water was just surging down the barrels of the two funnels. And fire was actually observed in the forward funnel bursting out, whereas with the second funnel, it was observed sucking scores of people down. Same with ventilators. All of these people caught in the water were being drawn to the barrels of the funnel and vents. And it was actually Second Officer Williams who was observed screaming wildly as he was sucked down the barrel of the second funnel. Just moments prior, Chief Officer Speed, who was taking his clothes off and his shoes off in preparation to jump into the river to swim clear of the ship before the ship took the final dive, he was observed getting crushed by a cargo boom as the ship rolled onto her side. And we can see here just scores of passengers all gathered onto the side of the ship after she capsized onto her side. When the ship overturned onto her starboard side, a lot of people actually managed to barrel run onto the side of the ship, and it was described as a black sanded beach, with each wave of water lapping against the side of the hull, lapping higher and higher and higher with each subtle wave. And so the engines, as they came in contact with the water, same with those searing hot dynamos, a massive explosion took place inside the engine room, shattering the midship section hull and blasting many of these people away from the hull of the ship. And the Empress of Ireland is gone.
Liam, if I may ask, with the store staff being in the background and not moving, do you know why she didn't move to the scene?
Yes, so the Storstad remained in the background because of the fact that they were carrying out a damage inspection with the ship. So a lot of the crew members were forward examining the damage to the hull, making sure that their damage was not threatening to their own ship. And unfortunately, they had no idea the true dire situation that the Storstad really was, or that the Empress of Ireland, was in. The fog actually blocks out noise a lot of the time. And so they weren't able to hear these awful, heart-wrenching noises of screams and the groans of metal and just all of this cacophony of noise. They were not able to hear any of that because the fog blocked it out. Until the fog cleared away. That was when they saw the truly terrible sight of the Empress of Ireland on her starboard side. And Captain Anderson's wife, she was one of the first people on the bridge to see exactly what it was. A lot of the sailors on the bridge, they were very confused as to what they were looking at, as if they could hardly believe what it was. But the wife of Captain Anderson, she immediately recognized what it was, and she fainted at the sight of it. And we can see here these air pockets rapidly flooding inside the Empress. Even though the Empress of Ireland already sank, those air pockets are still going to be flooding. And unfortunately, we know that there were a lot of air pockets inside this ship, such as inside the stewards' quarters. A lot of the stewards inside the ship, they were unfortunately trapped within their own quarters and unfortunately drowned. What you just saw here as well. I'm trying to keep up with this because of how fast everything with this story takes place. Similarly to what happened with the Britannia, after the Empress sank, a huge upheaval of water inside that river took place 3 times over again. Probably as a result from all of that displaced water from the ship sinking, rising back upwards, and just displacing that water and causing that huge upheaval of water 3 times over. Now, the collision took place at approximately 1:55 a.m. in the morning, and the ship sank at 2:10 in the morning. This is a very interesting thing, because technically, the ship sank in 15 minutes. However, from the time the Storstad separated to the time when the ship sank, that was 14 minutes. That's when the timer pretty much would begin for the sinking of the ship. So when the ship rolled, in addition to all of this machinery and ventilators and water tanks, thermo tanks, etc., in addition to all of that got thrown off the ship, one of the collapsible lifeboats that were chained to the port side of the deck also got thrown off, and it was capsized. And by the remarkable effort by several sailors and passengers in the water, they were actually able to turn the boat over again and right it so that they could get into that boat and out of the water. It's absolutely remarkable that they were able to do that. And here we see, just about an hour later, unfortunately, many of the passengers were gone by this point, having succumbed to the immense cold. With the fog having pretty much cleared, a lot of these lifeboats filled with passengers, a lot of these boats actually underfilled with passengers, they began to make their slow journey towards the Storstad, which still lied off in the distance. And when the lifeboats pulled up against the side of the Storstad, the crew members of the Storstad, they took fishing lines and nets and threw them over the side of the ship for passengers to climb onto the deck of the ship. And a lot of these passengers were so cold, so frozen, that a lot of these people just could not climb up the nets. They just couldn't. They did not have the strength to be able to do so. And unfortunately, a lot of these passengers in the lifeboats succumbed to the cold. And it's really tragic. Really so tragic. Here we see the government tender and mailboat, the Lady Evelyn, starting to pull into the wreck site of the Empress of Ireland. The Lady Evelyn was one of the tenders that took off mail from the Empress of Ireland before she sailed out into the Atlantic. And she saw the Empress of Ireland pretty much only an hour before the collision. And so when she was sending out SOS calls, the Lady Evelyn actually received distress calls. And about an hour or two after the sinking of the ship, the Lady Evelyn arrived at the scene to take off the passengers from the Storstad and load them onto the Lady Evelyn, take them to Rimouski. So, the wife of Captain Anderson, she's kind of an unsung hero of this disaster. She prepared large quantities of broth, lots of warm food, took them down into the boiler rooms where they could warm up, gave them clothing. As a matter of fact, she even went into her own cabin and ripped down the curtains and fabrics just to give them to the Empress of Ireland survivors, just to keep them warm. Here we can see the Lady Evelyn parting for Rimouski, overloaded with survivors from the Empress of Ireland. DK, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I heard stories that Captain Kendall, when he boarded the Storstad, he actually found Captain Anderson, and I kid you not, he actually asked him, "Are you in command of this vessel?" And once Captain Anderson said yes, Kendall blurted out, "You have sunk my ship."
Yes, absolutely. Captain Kendall, he was furious. Absolutely furious. And as soon as he saw Captain Anderson and confirmed that he was the captain of the vessel, that started a huge argument between the two, only broken up by sailors of the Empress of Ireland, surviving sailors. They had to break the fight up. And apparently, several other fights actually did break out after that main confrontation. But they were very quickly broken up so that they could focus efforts on keeping the passengers warm and relief efforts. You know, Captain Kendall really had to restrain himself from confronting Captain Anderson because he realized that there would be an inquiry later. There would be much more time to confront him later about this. And this is probably one of the more tragic parts of this entire animation. This here is a wall of every single person who lost their life aboard the Empress of Ireland. And this wall goes on for such a tragically long period of time. It goes on for probably 15 or so minutes. It was really powerful and really sobering to write down each of these names and go through all these papers and figure out the names of all these people who were lost. And to see the names of everybody on this vessel who unfortunately lost their life, it's just such a sobering thing to look at. So, something that you might have noticed by now is how few first-class passengers lost their life in comparison to what you're seeing with second cabin. And that's going to be relatively few in comparison to what you will be seeing with steerage, third cabin, and crew. And that's not just because first cabin was located higher up on the ship. It's not just because of that. It's mostly to do with the fact that there really weren't too many first cabin passengers aboard the Empress of Ireland at the time of her sinking. So, even though steerage passengers had lesser of a chance in comparison, second, first cabin, same goes with the crew members. Unfortunately, the unfortunate truth of the matter is a lot of these people, no matter what, no matter it being first cabin, second cabin, third cabin, crew, etc., no matter what, all of it was just unfortunately wiped out. It was just a tragedy where time was of the absolute essence. if you weren't up on deck by a certain point in time, unfortunately, you were basically doomed to go down with this ship. The staircases became bottlenecked very, very rapidly, especially in the steerage. As the panic really set in, these staircases were completely crammed and bottlenecked with passengers. Matter of fact, a diver that actually gave his testimony at what I presume to be an inquiry, regardless, it was a court document that I found in the University of Michigan archives. A diver testified that he found a steerage companionway completely collapsed with the remains of passengers around it, which signified to him that perhaps this wooden staircase, this narrow wood staircase, was so crowded with passengers that it just simply collapsed. The sinking of the Empress is such a gruesome disaster. Such a terrible, terrible disaster. Unfortunately, this particular collapsed staircase, it wasn't the only staircase that was found, presumably having been bottlenecked. A lot of the third-class staircases were also found completely jammed with passengers who were trying to get up onto deck but couldn't before the ship capsized and the ship rapidly flooded and went. It's just so unbelievably tragic. DK, I saw that you had a question.
Yeah, I found something on my phone. There were 138 children on board the Empress of Ireland, and nearly all but 4 died. And the youngest one I actually did found, and she was actually the last sole survivor of the sinking of the Empress of Ireland, is Grace Hannigan. Now, there is actually an interview of her on YouTube, and her story is just unbelievably tragic. And I understand that some of us do have children of our own, especially Jake Billy, who has a child of his own. He just can't, and I just cannot, well, both of us, really, we can't understand the magnitude of what it would be like to lose a child to a sinking. It would be very horrific.
Oh my god, it would be so unbelievably gut-wrenching. And if you take a look at some of these names upcoming here, you'll notice, right here for an example, Williams. So many of these families, and especially third class, they were just completely wiped out. Entire families traveled together in the third class, and just so many of them were completely wiped out. It is so unbelievably tragic. It's hard to even wrap one's head around the fact that entire families were decimated. Many, many, many of these. And going back real quick to that interview you were talking about, DK, that interview is so unbelievably tragic. You can find this interview on YouTube. And she talks about how she lost her parents in this disaster. After the ship rolled, she just never really was able to, link up with them again. And it's just so horrific. It's so tragic. I can barely bring myself to actually watch that particular interview. It's just so gut-wrenchingly terrible.
Who is training to be a swimming teacher and have friends who've got children of their own, you can't imagine really how heartbreaking it is, especially for children who can't swim at all. And there was no swimming lessons back in 1914, so you've got to remember there was no possibility for children learning how to swim. So all but 4 died.
Yeah.
I'm lost for words, because this is just really horrific to hear and to understand that as well, because these children never got a chance to survive, really, not even to reach a lifeboat. But yeah, it's just hard, really, really hard.
It absolutely is. I couldn't agree with you more. And as you said, swimming lessons, not a lot of people, very few in fact, knew how to swim at this era, at this time. And unfortunately, a lot of the people on board this ship, they were in their nightgowns, really just as soon as they got in the water, these nightgowns, they weighed them down, and they were drowned by that. And it's just so horrific, so absolutely terrible. On a bit of a lighter note, a story that I kind of wanted to tell about the Empress, on the note of actually swimming, is the name escapes me of this particular passenger, but one of the passengers who survived the sinking of the Empress of Ireland, he was from California in the United States. And he actually was a bit of a famed swimmer. He competitively swam across the Golden Gate in California, which is such a lengthy swim. I believe that swim is probably about 3 miles, I want to say 2 miles. And it being in the Golden Gate as well, the currents there are just absolutely ferocious, absolutely horrible. And there was a yearly competition in California for people to swim across the Golden Gate and back. And I believe on several instances, he placed either third or second place in these competitions. So he was a fantastic swimmer, really great swimmer. He swam competitively, and he just so happened to be on the Empress of Ireland when she went down. And incredibly, it is one of the stories that is just so difficult for me to even believe. It's so remarkable. When the ship capsized and he ended up in the water, he managed to make the swim all the way ashore. He swam all the way ashore from the Empress of Ireland, and he was pretty much naked. He had no clothes on, pretty much. And he had to walk through the Canadian woodlands until he found a village. And he went to the local police in that village and notified them of the shipwreck. And you have to wonder just what the people in that police office were thinking when this man with no clothes walked in, saying that a shipwreck is happening out in the St. Lawrence River. It's just such an unbelievable story, and he managed to survive because he swam ashore. It's incredible. And this is the swim ashore. It was a lengthy and a very lengthy and enduring to get ashore, because you got to keep in mind how cold that water was. And when water is that cold, it sucks the energy out of you. And he was able to make it all the way ashore and walk to a nearby village to notify them of this wreck that was taking place. It's such a remarkable story. So, one of the things that is very interesting about this story as well is earlier on in this animation, I showcased the Allen liner Alsatian passing by the Empress of Ireland on her premier voyage to Quebec City from Liverpool. Now, as a little bit of a note, this wasn't her maiden voyage. Previously, I believe she was doing voyages to Philadelphia or Boston. And the Allen line just decided to put her on the Canadian route. So earlier on in this animation, we see the Alsatian on her first trip to Quebec City, passing by the Empress of Ireland, dethroning the as the largest ship on the Canadian route. After the Empress of Ireland went down, a lot of these passengers, a lot of the survivors, they had nowhere to go. Their ship that was taking them to Liverpool had just sunk. So the Canadian Pacific Line actually transferred them to the Allen liner Alsatian to take them back to Liverpool. And there were a lot of press members who were aboard the Alsatian, and there's a lot of photographs you can find of survivors of the Empress of Ireland on the deck of the Alsatian being transported back to Liverpool. And a lot of these press members actually took such heart-wrenching images in Liverpool of these survivors reuniting with their family members in Liverpool. It was such an emotional journey, and it's pretty interesting, actually. A lot of these photographs of the passengers on the Alsatian, a lot of them are pictured actually eating their meals up on deck rather than inside the ship. And you have to wonder, like, after this ordeal they went through, were they just so disturbed from the Empress that they just did not want to, they didn't want to go back inside the ship after their ordeal? It's just it's so fascinating. DK, I saw that you had a question.
Yeah, there's also a another ship that I like to mention that is actually worth mentioning. The following day, there was actually a Cunarder that actually did made her maiden voyage, and that would be the RMS Aquitania.
Yes,
Her stories
that's
and
right.
passengers were very, very uneasy boarding a ship after the Empress of Ireland was sank. And hard to believe this, that the Aquitania, during her maiden voyage, was under command by no other than Captain William Turner, who was actually right before the sinking of the Lusitania.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And you can understand why a lot of these passengers, of course, would be so uneasy boarding a ship after the sinking of the Empress of Ireland. Especially just because of how grisly this tragedy is and the nature of this tragedy. And, of course, the news, they were very, very quick to publish this disaster in the papers. Sorry, Jamie, I saw that you had a question as well.
As well, going back to the Alsatian, is that she would later on in her life also herself become an empress, being the Empress of France of 1913.
That is correct. That's correct. Yes, and it's very fascinating because a lot of accounts actually say that the Alsatian, later the Empress of France, she actually would more or less become the replacement ship of the Empress of Ireland. She would fill in that gap that the Empress of Ireland left behind. So it's just incredibly fascinating how tied the Alsatian is with the Empress of Ireland. Because there actually is a postcard that was printed just a few months before the Empress of Ireland went down, actually picturing the Alsatian and the Empress of Ireland in Liverpool. I'll get that postcard real quick, actually. It's very neat.
The music sounds like it's nearing my god to thee, but it's not actually nearing my god to thee.
Yes, the song that's playing here is a song called Irish Eyes. And this is a song that was actually performed. This is a rendition of a song that was made by a friend of mine. His name's Jet Pendergrass. He occasionally makes music for Titanic, Honor and Glory. And this was a piece that was made for Honor and Glory. And they very generously let me use this in this animation. And it's such a perfect piece, I thought, especially because of the name.
It definitely is beautiful, though. That's it. Oh my god, that was just wow. Okay, I mean, I know a lot of people have saw this, but I'm really glad I waited just to see this because it definitely took a long time, and I could see why you put your heart and soul into it, Liam, because 8 months, it's worth it, isn't it? For the way that you were describing it, the way that you put it into it, it sounds like it was all worth it.
It was such a... It was a lot, that's for sure. It was certainly a lot, but I really do think it was. I really do. Because I had such a unique opportunity to be able to go into such depth into this story that really has not been depicted in animations before. You hear about a lot of this information, but you don't actually get to see it. And I am truly so glad that I had the opportunity to work on such an animation and really just tell this story for what it was.
I can see that in Discord you've posted the postcard picture. Wow. Oh my goodness, look at that. Oh, that's cool. I know that we can't really present it on the podcast, but on the YouTube channel, we'll just put like a little screenshot of that.
Yeah, yes, please,
stunning.
Absolutely.
It looks
This is that kind of goes back to my point that I just made a couple minutes ago, where the Alsatian kind of has a very strange tie to the Empress of Ireland, where, you know, here in March of 1914, only 2 months before the Empress sank, she's pictured in this beautiful postcard passing by the Empress of Ireland. And then the night before, or the night of the sinking of the Empress of Ireland, the Alsatian passes by the Empress of Ireland, dethroning the Empress as the largest ship on the Canadian route. And then several more months later, she turns out to be the replacement ship of the Empress of Ireland, becoming the Empress of France. Whereas after the Empress of Ireland sank, she also transported the survivors of the Empress of Ireland back to. So she just has such a very strange connection to the Empress of Ireland her entire life. It's very fun.
And also, it's really good to get your research out there as well, because they always say for every enthusiast and every historian, you always have to dive into any deep research that you can, really. And you were really lucky to get all the evidence there to make it into a brand new setting. It's kind of like, say, for example, that George Behe, when he wrote the book about Captain Smith, J. Bruce Ismay, and Thomas Andrews, with accounts that had never been discovered before. It's just with that example and with the extended research that's there, it makes a whole difference, even to an animator, an enthusiast, anyone really.
Yeah, for sure. And that's one of the things that I was very excited about with this particular animation. So with this animation, there definitely was a lot of areas where I kind of took a step away from what has been commonly depicted with the Empress of Ireland. And that's something that I was very excited about. I was very excited to show these things for the first time. One of the things that I was very hesitant on showing was the collapsed staircase in steerage, because that's something not a lot of people have really heard about, the story of the Empress of Ireland. And I originally chose not to show it just because of that, but I kind of realized that I think it would be best to show that and all of these other things as well, simply because of the fact that this information needs to be out there. People need to see this information and learn from it. And I've kind of decided as well, while I was making this animation, that it probably wouldn't be a good idea to sugarcoat it, because if I sugarcoat it, I'm essentially censoring history in an indirect way. So I kind of decided to take this animation and show it for what it was. Really just depict it with just in a brutal fashion, because I really just wanted to show the history for what it was. Jamie, I saw that you wanted to say something.
So I'll try to speak English correctly, because each time when I see that memoriam of all those passengers' names, it always gets me emotional. So I'll try to speak English correctly. But one thing that I also loved personally about your animation is because there are so many eyes recently on the Empress of Ireland. Of course, another amazing example is the video of Oceanliner Designs with the amazing animation as well of Jack Gibson. And what I like personally, what you did, Liam, is that even though you helped on that video, you made this animation your own. Like, oh yeah, we know this belongs to Liam. This is something that Liam did. Because no, really, because it's with the video of Mike, he talks about the entire amazing history of the ship, and what you did is putting the human elements with the with the models of humans and the voice acting and the screaming and the breaking apart, and then all of nowhere just silence. It gets you emotional, I'm sure that everybody at home gets emotional, because how can't you get emotional after seeing this? And like you said, I don't know. It's a loss of words. There's so many emotions describing this.
Oh, thank you so much, Jamie. Those compliments, again, they mean the world to me. Thank you so much. And yeah, it's just, I don't know. I think this really was a bit of a step away that I was kind of nervous for as well, when it comes to depicting the people. That was actually something that I've been experimenting with in Blender for quite some time now, since 2022, trying to get working people moving in big animated crowds like that. And that's kind of, to my knowledge at least, the first time an animation has ever showed something like that. And I'm pretty proud of it. I'm very happy with how it turned out, because that was kind of the point of this animation. I didn't want to focus on just the ship. I wanted to make this about the people who are on the ship. And I really do think that having those movements really changes the vibe of it. It really makes it feel a lot more. I don't really want to say it makes it feel real, but it makes it feel, I suppose, surreal. Seeing just the desperate fight for survival happening before you. And this is something that I really want to work on and build upon and improve with future animations that I want to make down the road.
Sounds like to me as well. Going back to what you said about third class, Liam, because every single maritime history topic that comes up, third class always gets sugar coated. And another example for this is the Titanic. When the Titanic sank, while it was sinking, third class doesn't get mentioned a lot, especially since with the rumours about trapping down below. And I found new research to suggest that it was the case, but then there was a story that I've known for years, and that story was part of a human ladder, and there was 2 surviving testimonies from 2 women in third class of crew members creating like a human ladder to carry all women and babies off to the lifeboats as soon as possible, and even small children as well. But with that example, and then in comparison with the Empress of Ireland, it does make you think that in animation, especially real-time syncings, third class should be included a bit more.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I couldn't agree more. Third class unfortunately does get sugarcoated quite a bit with these disasters. And unfortunately, a part of that is just because of the fact that society seems to often drift towards first cabin and, getting their side of the story. A lot of the newspapers that I went through while researching this a couple months ago, a lot of them talked about the Irvings who were in first class and really trying to piece together what their final moments were. And it's just very fascinating because a lot of the newspapers, especially with Titanic, they drift towards the first cabin rather than third cabin. And that's something I kind of wanted to change a little bit with this animation. I really wanted to depict a lot of third class and what was going on inside the third class, while also balancing that with first class. Because, third class, it was just an absolute tragedy. So much of third class was just completely decimated. Entire families. There's actually an instance inside, you may have noticed it, inside the memoriam wall. There is a case, there might be more, but there is a case where an entire family of 6 is completely wiped out. And it's just so unbelievably. And I think a part of the reason why a lot of third class seems to get overlooked, especially with the Empress of Ireland, is just because of how many people were lost in the third cabin. Because so many people were lost. So many people were lost. Very few actually survived to be able to tell the tale of what happened. And I think that's in part why, just because of how few people survived.
Yeah, I mean, that is just like a really, really big thing to think about. But hopefully, in the near future, there will be more videos that will include third class a bit more. And that's something that I'm hoping to aim for the channel as well. But it would be nice just to include some more animation and some more videos about third class anyway, because I don't know about you guys, but I definitely think they were the most important part out of second and third class, really.
Yeah, I completely agree.
That's a definite. Very definite.
And of course, each life they're worth just the same. They're all worth just the same. But with third class, these people, more often than not, a lot of these people, they barely had any money. They were traveling home. They were traveling to see family. A lot of these people that were immigrating back home, in the case of the Empress of Ireland. And it's just unbelievably tragic because, of course, as I mentioned, a lot of these people, they traveled in larger groups. They traveled as entire families. And of course, more often than not, these entire families were just lost. One of the heartbreaking things that I saw while I was putting together this, this memorial list of names is I found a list of survivors with a list of those who were lost. Some of the very sad things I noticed with the third class is you'll have entire families that were lost, like, say, 4 members of an entire family that were lost. And then there will be one person of that family that survived, a sole survivor. And it's just unbelievably tragic because something I couldn't stop thinking about was, what was that one person thinking, that sole survivor from that family? What could have been going through their head? Because I don't know about you guys, but if I were in their shoes, that would just be something that would me up for the rest of my life, honestly, at night.
You had your hand up.
Me?
Yep.
Oh yeah. No. What I also wanted to add is I for some reason I'm blanking out if this was shown on the screen in your animation, Liam. For some reason, forgive me. But also with the if we compare again the Empress to the Titanic, with the Titanic there was she took not extremely long to sink, but I mean there was time to wait. With the Empress there was no waiting. It was just boom, ship being hit. Couple of minutes later she's gone. That's also with what you said, with a whole family being entirely wiped out. Of course, the human brain, the human psyche, need of course to comprehend what's going on, and how could you if a ship is gone in 14 minutes?
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing to consider as well is Titanic. She sank a couple of days into her trip. Empress of Ireland, she sank really only a couple hours into her trip if you think about it, because she left Quebec City at about 4 o'clock, as to my understanding. And she sank not even 12 hours later. And these people, they barely knew their way around the ship, especially in the steerage. And it's just, it's horrifying. It's absolutely horrifying because as soon as that power went out, it wasn't like the Titanic where there were sets of emergency lights illuminating certain sections of the ship, allowing for people to, maybe see where they're going briefly, or people in lifeboats to very faintly observe what's going on. As soon as those lights went out, it was just complete blackness on the interior. There was just no way to escape. You couldn't see anything. Absolutely anything. The few people who did manage to escape after the power went out, a lot of these people just so happened to have matches with them, or some of the crew members, they had lanterns with them. So if you didn't have any of those, it was basically a death sentence in most cases, especially with how fast that water was roaring in. Because you have to keep in mind, by the time the Empress of Ireland keeled over onto her side, water was already filling up A deck. Water was already on the top landing of the first-class staircase.
And then it just shows you really how awful it could be. Oh, I still can't imagine that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Another thing to keep in mind, of course, too, is the list of the ship. The list was just increasing more and more and more. And, after about maybe 15, 20 degrees, it starts to become borderline impossible to walk on the decks of the ship. And it becomes impossible to even climb up staircases. In the case of the first-class staircase, there's a lot of really terrible testimonials where people just couldn't even climb up that staircase anymore. People just kind of resigned to the railings of the staircase, clinging onto it, because it was just impossible to be able to climb up the staircase. And it's just terrible. And you got to keep in mind, it becomes impossible pretty much to walk up a listing deck at about 15, 20 degrees. The ship capsized, turned over onto her side at about 45 degrees. You have to imagine just how insanely difficult it must have been to be able to walk on the decks at that point in time. As a matter of fact, by that point, a lot of the people couldn't even walk on the decks of the ship at that point. A lot of people were just clinging onto railing.
Well, it's definitely hard to believe as well, though, especially up the side of the hole as well. If it was me, I would have been terrified. What would you think, DK and Jamie? Would you be terrified if something like that happened?
Yeah, it'd be a definite. I mean, I'd be scared half to death as well.
Yeah, it's I think with one of these disasters, it's very it's very imperative that you try to keep as cool and collected as humanly possible. There's a story from the Hindenburg disaster. I believe it was a cabin boy. I think he was inside the galley, and one of the water tanks overhead bursted, and he was already in a panic state beforehand. And when one of those water tanks above bursted and he got doused with water, he was able to think clearly from that cold water dousing him. And it was because of that he was able to escape the disaster. So it's very important in one of these tragedies that, you think as calmly and as collectively as possible. Because it could very well mean, life and death.
Well, I think at that note, we'll probably end it here, really. But it was definitely really something to experience with looking at the animation and explaining everything of the Empress of Ireland in general. And I definitely think she's one worth remembering, even though she's largely forgotten. Wouldn't you think so, Jamie? Because I know that the Empress of Ireland is your favourite ship.
Well, exactly, she is. When it comes to the Empress of Ireland, I have pretty much all the books on the Empress of Ireland. I've been studying the ship for almost 4 years, and just in my own time, and seeing this animation and seeing that she's getting so more attention these days, even though that, like you say, she's so much forgotten. It makes me glad that she's also that she's so much out there, but also again sad because of course it's just extremely tragic. And but I'm so thankful then for the people that we have in this amazing community of, I always call ourselves ocean liner nerds, like Liam, like you guys, like the people at Ocean Liner Designs and so many others that they actually take the time, months, to dedicate themselves to this project, to tell the story as correctly and respectfully, and visualizing. Words can't even exit my mouth, but I think the point of my appreciation from a 3-year Empress of Ireland nerd comes across.
Definitely agree. And yeah, so we'll probably leave it at the note there. So, boys, thank you so much for coming on, and especially a huge thank you to Liam for allowing us to see your animation as well, and a massive well done to you, because that is really good, and it deserves a lot of recognition. So if you haven't seen the footage in detail yet, I will leave a link in the description box down below, and go check it out. And if you would like to see more animation from Liam, please subscribe to him. And then if you want more maritime content as well, please subscribe to DK, because he's also done a documentary of the Empress of Ireland as well as Jamie. So everyone's always doing the Empress of Ireland animation. And until then, guys, I hope you have a wonderful day. And from all of us, we're sending lots of love, and we will see you very soon. Take care, guys. Bye.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you so much, everybody.
Thank y'all.